Shalom, one of the soft souls, but give no praise to Yahweh, Bashem Yahushua, Bashem Kalkadash. Double honors to the apostles of great Most High, and honors to you brothers doing the work, the most high in truth and in sincerity. Yahweh's real name, of whom the world even calls God, Jehovah or Yahweh. His real name is Yahweh. The son's true name is Yahushua, and when we pray, Yahweh, Ba Hashem, Yahushua, meaning in, meaning the, and Sham, meaning names Yahweh, and the name of Yahushua. Real quick, which go on, I saw this title. Obviously, there are certain precepts that come to mind, but I'll listen to it, and there were some decent points. So I'm just gonna play a bit of it. Get some precepts, and those will be a edifying lesson, right? So basically, the U.S. expands Iran war because one of the things that they're saying is that ultimately these wars are never gonna end. Right, it's ultimately when we read the precepts, we know that whatever happens in the interim, right, in the near to short term future, if you will, right, that it's never gonna end, right? There will always be, I remember when I was a so-called Christian, right, pray for peace in the Middle East. It's like, no, that's not what we're looking for. Right, we're looking for turmoil in that region, and what are we seeing? Turmoil in that region. So, prophecy is very much on our side. But as I was saying, right, this is Jeremiah 49:20. Right, it says, "Therefore hear the counsel of Yahweh that He hath taken against Edom, right, and His purposes that He has purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Right, surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely He shall make their habitations desolate with them." Okay, and who's the least of the flock? These Amalekites, man, right, over there, in our land, pretending to be us, right? But guess what? What the Lord is doing at the moment, right? He's he's getting more and more people to look sideways, right, at Amalek, but and also by extension at Edom in general, right? More and more people are starting to realize that these Edomites are the problem of the world, right? Because we understand ultimately what's going on. This is just a restructuring of the of the old world, if you will, right? And and whilst beginning a migration into the new world, right? And they think that as has been said before, they think that they can manage the decline, right, into this new system, right? But what we're what we're basically seeing. Sorry, I forgot my point there. I was just speaking about. So they think that they can manage the decline, but this old world is being destroyed. Okay, this old world is being destroyed, and this is a perfect situation here. There's this particular war, right? Once again, we understand that regardless of what happens in the near to short term, right, that you're still gonna see issues in that land, because that is what's prophesied, right? This is Jeremiah 3. It's like I had a point. I was trying to I was trying to filibuster for it to come back, Salakia. But yeah, no, it is what it is, right? This is not Jeremiah, Salakia, Joel. Right, this is Joel 3 and 2. It says, "And I will also gather all nations and bring them down into the valley of Yehoshaphat," right, which is that Middle East region there, right? It says, "And will plead," which means judge, "with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations," right, and parted my land. You look at our land, it is parted, right, by them Amalekites on one hand, and the Ishmaelites on the other. Right, jump down to verse 9. So, "Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles," right? "Prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up." What you're seeing in the world right now is that that idea of basically men preparing for war, right? Because the Spirit says that war is on the horizon, right? In fact, recently even war economy, right? Recently you basically had conversations about basically making pushing into that war economy. I'm just trying to find an article that ain't paywalled. Is this okay? Yeah, so enough. You just need to see the headline, right? It says from the Eurasian, right? It says Pentagon pushes Ford and GM to revive U.S. arsenal of democracy after Iran war munitions crisis. Right, automobile makers have very rich history of defense production during the Second World War. Many of today's renowned car makers including Japan's Mitsubishi and Toyotas, Germany's Volkswagen and Daimler-Benz, right? France's Renault and the UK's Rolls-Royce, Italy's Fiat and the US's Ford, GM and Chrysler were deeply involved in defense manufacturing, producing everything from tanks and aircraft engines to armored vehicles, munitions, and military utility trucks, right? Which is funny because you always see that Toyota, right? In them, propaganda clips, right? I always call them that. Or in the Middle East, right? Man with turbans, right? But brand spanking new Toyotas, the Toyota pickup truck. I was so, but yeah, let's carry on here, right? So basically, proving that even from a financial and manufacturing point of view, that this is the direction that the world is going in. Verse 10 says, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. No, we're just talking about turning, turning from agriculture into military, right? Which you've been seeing nations do that for a little while, to the point where you've got, it's a country like Pakistan, right, which has become the quote mediator of this entire crisis, if you will, right? Verse 11 says, assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about, that the cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahweh. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Yahweh, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get you down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of Yahweh is near in the valley of decision. Right, so that's why we're constantly keeping an eye on, exactly what is going on. Right, one of the things that we've been commanded to do, right, is to watch and pray. It says Mark 13:33. It says, take ye heed, watch and pray, for you know not when the time is. Right, keeping an eye on what's happening in the world. Right, happening, with this particular situation. I was reasoning, earlier on, and one of the things we were discussing was, just this idea of, America's so-called blockade of Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, right? And, Iran has basically said, look, if we're boys, you can let your ships through, right? But then in other, nations, right, enemy nations, right, you ain't getting your stuff through, right? So who one of Iran's boys is China, right? And one of the things people say is that, well, wait, if they start trying to harass Chinese ships, right, is the Chinese military gonna now, or rather Navy, now gonna come and protect their ships on the high seas, right, through that strait? And but what would the effect of that be? The effect of that will be that the American, you're moving the Chinese Navy into that region, right? So everything is lining up nicely. But let's play some of these points, right? So first one I want is from 26 minutes.
Depression, we have the possibility of a famine, is because of course are not able to pull out, even now that the war has been lost, is or even predict the consequences that will come. You mentioned the global depression. We have the possibility of a famine. Is
which, when you read the prophecies, right? The prophecies say that there will be a famine. In fact, let's bring some of these bad boys, right? This is 2 Kings 6:24-29. That's it shows you just how dire it gets. Okay. Let's get Sirach 39:28. From 28 says, there be spirits that are created for vengeance, which in their fury lay on sore strokes. In the time of their destruction, they pour out their force and appease the wrath of him that made them. Fire and hell and famine and death, all these were created for vengeance. Right? So the Lord is going to use these certain things for the judgment of this world. And why is the world going to be judged? Right? You read 2 Ezra 16, right? It speaks about for great wickedness. Is why these things are come, right? For because it might be 15, right? It's because of their pride, right? And talking of 2 Ezra 16, let's read verse 18-22. So the beginning of sorrows and great mourning, the beginning of famine and great death, the beginning of wars, right? And the power shall stand in fear, the beginning of evils. What shall I do when these evils shall come? Behold, famine and plague, tribulation and anguish are sent as scourges for amendment, right? So it's punishment, right, for wickedness. Right, which is why ultimately it says in Isaiah 65, right, my servant shall eat. But so for all these things, they shall not turn from their wickedness, nor be always mindful of the scourges. Behold, victuals shall be so good cheap upon earth, that they shall think themselves to be in good case. And even then shall evils grow upon earth, sword, famine, and great confusion. For many of them that dwell upon earth shall perish of famine, and the others that escape the hunger shall the sword destroy. Right? Which makes me think actually of now I want to open a new tab. It's Amos 5, right, and 18. Woe unto you that desire the day of Yahweh. To what end is it for you? The day of Yahweh is darkness and not light, as if a man did flee from a lion and the bear met him, or went into the house and leaned his hand at the wall and the serpent bit him. Right? So not the day of Yahweh be darkness and not light, even very dark and no brightness in it. Right? So, when we're reading this, right, it's just giving that, an impression that of like, just hopelessness. You go from one issue to another, right? And dying of famine, man, is a horrible way to die, right? In fact, I have it here in the list, right? This is Lamentations 4:9. It says, "They that be slain with the sword are better than they that be slain with hunger, for these pine away, stricken through one of the fruits of the field." Right? But let's play on.
Because in human nature, there's always the assumption that the present era is permanent.
And that's it. And that was the thing that made my ears peak. Right? Let's run that again.
Yeah, global depression. We have the possibility of a famine. Is because in human nature, there's always the assumption that the present era is permanent.
Yeah, that's why you're having people living in what was a cognitive dissonance, right? They think that things will go back to normal, right? And once again, it's because each in their experience, in their existence, things have quote unquote gone back to normal. But there's gonna come a point where it's done, okay, right? There's gonna come a point where it's done, right? And it very much looks like this is the point when you're really looking at the the long lasting effects, right? Even if the war was to end today, like end, no more retaliation, no more hitting of anything, right? Even if it was to end today, the damage is done, right? There's gonna be a massive food shortage, right? There's gonna be an increase in energy bills, okay? So that's just a very interesting thing, right? There was a point in the video that I just thought of that I've forgotten about now. But yeah, let's read this. It's Psalms 49:11. Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever, and their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. Okay, and that's it, right? They think that it's gonna continue forever, right? Which is just not true, right? We understand that we are getting once again we're in those final end, where the end of Esau's kingdom, right? The end of Esau's world, right?
There's only been 35 years since the Soviet Union collapsed. It's
and that was going toe to toe, right? But that collapsed, okay.
It's the current era. It's the conditions of it. It hasn't been here for very long, and the assumption that it would stay like this forever is quite extraordinary. So you often get the impression that politicians aren't ready to make the necessary adjustments because they don't appreciate or recognize the severity of the situation.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump to my next point that I wanted, right? Lead into it.
I think this people ask me how I compare it to Britain in 1956, but I think by no means the US will remain a massive power. But relative decline I think is important.
Which even on that, it's just like it's just a reminder of why ultimately it's the men of the Lord that break these things down, because once again we go and find out what happens in the near to short term, right? The short to near to, whatever the phrase is, right? But one thing we understand is America will be destroyed, okay? And it needs to be destroyed for all of the wickedness, for all of its wine, right? But hey, forget all of that, for all of the wickedness it's done to the children of Israel, right?
Because if a power is in relative decline, the alliance system, instead of being a form of monopolizing on security, everyone wanted to tie the security to the US in the 90s, but if it's a declining hegemon and it might use the frontline states to weaken its opponents, You see this in the Gulf states. They have to question whether or not this is a good position still to be. I mean, it's not the 1990s. I know they're talking about this in East Asia, in South Korea, because whenever one enters,
and that's a particular one that I know quite well about, right? Because the Koreans basically they hosted the American THAAD system, right? The that multi-billion-dollar system, right? And it cost Korea a ton load of money, right? Because China was like, yo, you're not putting that in Korea, right? Korea was kind of given no choice, right? Because basically Korea is a vassal of the United States, right? Korea, it basically America was like, look, we're putting this here, right? So basically, China was like, all right, cool. So you got the two massive car companies out of Korea, Kia and Hyundai, which is same company basically. They had factories in China that got closed. The tourism got affected, and then also Korea's one of Korea's biggest export, that K-pop, K-drama, or whatever, right? That had controls or something like that, put on it, right? So the Koreans lost out big, to the tune of billions, right? Only for America to then just go and say, yeah, actually, we're gonna take this THAAD system to go and protect Israel, okay?
an alliance, yes, one gets security, but one can also provoke a response. And at the moment, the security, the gain, it seems to be reducing, while provoking, for example, China isn't worth it. And at some point, I think the Europeans will talk about this as well. But I think this is a overall shift, I think, in the international distribution of power. So I think at the end of the day,
Yeah, because once again, Esau's trying to manage the decline of this world, right? But what we're gonna see, right, is the Lord is still gonna is the one that's gonna have the last laugh, right? So let's grab this. This is Job 5:12. It says that he disappointeth the device of the crafty, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise, right? He hath taken the wise in their own craftiness, and the counsel of the froward is carried headlong, right? So he's doing the most, right? He's doing the most. He's thinking, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, right? It's like a 100,000 step plan, right? And he thinks that he's going to get every single one of those steps right, right? But what he's not accounted for is the spirit, right? Because the spirit of the Most High wants Esau to only get so far, right? In fact, where is, I've not bought that one out in ages. Right, this is Job 14:5. Seeing his days are determined, the number of his months are with thee. Right, thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass, and that's it. Right, there's only so far that Esau can go. Right, thus saith the Lord. Once again, as always, thus saith the Lord. Okay, so the Lord's gonna allow Esau to get just far enough. Right, what does it say in the 20th chapter? Right, Job 20th chapter. Right, this is where should we start from? I'll just jump to it, right? It says Job 20:22, in the fullness of his sufficiency he shall be in straits, right? It says every hand of the wicked, which as we see here, Imal, right, meaning laborer, right, shall come upon him. Right, it says when he is about to fill his belly, the Most High shall cast the fury of his wrath upon him, and shall rain upon him while he's eating. Yes, he's gonna get so close to his agenda, but the Most High is gonna say no, no, no. Okay, and then what was it? Yes, it's the last point.
Do it quickly for Ukraine. We can't do it because we have other responsibilities. So this is, I think, the Colby speech, a clear statement of the Americans divorcing themselves from Europe at the military level. It's basically saying to the Europeans, you deal with the Ukraine war. They're not saying you shut down the Ukraine war. In fact, I think the document reads like, we expect the war to go on, and that's hardly surprising. We failed to shut the war down.
Right. So, they're framing it as, America wanted to, divorce, Europe, right? And then when you're reading this is LBC, right, leading Britain's conversation, right? The US is no longer our friend, right? Is what you see there. Then, I saw something else, forgot where it was, but once again pushing this idea of America and Europe no longer being, two, Right, so no longer being one now. Once again, you hear, different commentators, different, possible elders, Archeum speaking on it, right? It's like they're trying to manage this separation into a multipolar world, right? But what they don't seem to understand is that it is the will of the Lord, right? It is the will of the Lord for America, right, to basically ultimately be attacked by her allies, right? It says Obadiah 1:7 says, all the men of that confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him, right? So the different nations that have been one and the same with Esau, right? They're gonna come up against with America. Sorry, they're gonna come up against America, right? And then let's jump to this, right? It says Revelation 17:6, right? And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, right? And shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire, right? Once again, we're starting to see the makings of that happen, right? So as always, Lord's without edifying. Until next time, we say Shalom.